Welcome, folks, to episode 70 of WWE Network and Chill here today, where every single Tuesday I, Graham G.S. Matthews, break down all the content that I watch on the WWE Network. Today we're talking Table for Three, the WCW versus nWo episode that aired last week after Monday Night Raw on the WWE Network. So another great installment of Table for Three, which is really no surprise. Every installment of this show is typically great, this one being no exception, featuring Sean Waltman, otherwise known as X-Pac, X-Pac, what have you, Diamond Dallas Page, and Scott Hall, a.k.a. Razor Ramon. So all these three guys have awesome chemistry and history with one another. Obviously, Scott Hall and DDP are great friends beyond the ring, with DDP Yoga and all that type of stuff. And obviously, Sean Waltman and Scott Hall, very good friends from being members of the Clique and then nWo. So in this scenario, DDP is representing the WCW version, the WCW, whereas Sean Waltman and Scott Hall are nWo. So I must say, too, I mean, we've seen quite a bit of DDP before. If you follow his work, as I do, you see him all the time. But you don't see too much of Sean Waltman and Scott Hall and stuff like this. I mean, we see him from time to time in interviews and stuff. I mean, I think Sean Waltman has his own show. But these guys, if you have not seen them in quite some time, then you realize as soon as you start watching this episode how great they're looking these days. I mean, DDP's always looked good, but Sean Waltman and Scott Hall look better now than they have in a long-ass time, if not ever. Scott Hall even says, I'm pretty happy with where I'm at right now. Sean Waltman says, I feel better now than I ever have before. Says that life is amazing, and I can believe it, but he looks like he's really loving and living life right now, which is great. So they talk about the nWo, the debut of the group. They don't really go too much in depth with it. I think they did it, I'm pretty sure anyway, they did. It might have been the Clique, I don't remember. But they did some sort of nWo Clique episode of Table for Three not too long ago. I think with Hall, Nash, and Waltman. And obviously instead of Nash, they have DDP in this episode. But still, they don't go too much in depth with it, but they do talk about quite a bit about the nWo in this episode, as they should. That's the name of the show, the name of this installment of Table for Three. DDP says, which I never knew, that he was only one of 4 people that knew that Scott Hall was coming into the WCW when Scott Hall invaded back in May of 1996. Who the other 3 people were, I have no idea. I would assume it was probably Eric Bischoff. I don't know who the other 2 people would have been. Maybe Kevin Nash, but he wasn't there yet, so I'm not really sure. So they talk about that. Scott Hall even credits Larry Zbyszko for the success of the nWo, saying that he, being on commentary, was saying, what are these guys doing here? What's their business? You know, why are they here? What are they doing here? Blah, blah, blah. So he really put over that nWo angle, the Outsiders, when they first showed up. And I think he was the one who coined the phrase, the Outsiders. And Hall really, really dug that nickname based off the movie and said that when merchandise was made, he didn't want the Outsiders on the shirt. He just wanted Outsiders. It sounded a lot cooler. So that's what he had made on the shirt, not long after. And he talks about how when the nWo was born, which was, this is no stretch here, this is very much truthful, that when the nWo was created, that people weren't happy with the nWo success, but Hall brings up the fact that before the nWo, they just weren't selling houses. They weren't selling out buildings and whatnot. WCW was dying a slow death until the birth of the nWo in 1996. So Scott Hall talked about how people are really, what's the word? Not hesitant, but maybe, I forgot the word, had a lot of resentment, I think is the word I'm looking for, towards the nWo guys and how they wouldn't lay down to be spray painted by these guys. And even Scott Hall brought up that if you lay down for me now, then it might lead to me and us, the entire nWo, leading to us getting our comeuppance down the road, which never really ended up happening, but I see what he was talking about. I understand where he was going with that. They praised Dennis Rodman and his involvement with the angle back in the late 90s, who was a great celebrity to bring in, by the way. No sarcasm there. I think Dennis Rodman really did a lot for WCW. I think that was 97. I'm pretty sure we just recently celebrated the 20-year anniversary of the tag team match that he was a part of. So Dennis Rodman was one of the best business decisions that WCW ever made, and bringing him in and getting the exposure and whatnot for the company at that point in time. Scott Hall talks about the origin of his "Survey Says" catchphrase, and he said that he was done helping WCW right around the time that they fired Sean Waltman, and he went over to back over to WWE, joining D-Generation X. And by that point, I think he had said that Waltman had a neck injury at the time that he was fired. So once that happened, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash were like, fuck this, we don't really want to be here anymore, which Sean Waltman did say, X-Pac did say in his debut promo, or his return promo, whatever, on Raw the night after WrestleMania 15, or 14, I think it might have been. He did say that if Scott Hall and Kevin Nash could be here right now, they would be, and you know that, Eric Bischoff, you know that as a fact, blah, blah, blah. And Hall pretty much confirmed right here, kind of sort of speaking for Kevin Nash, that if they were contractually able to, obligated to, they would leave WCW. They were kind of done with the company by that point. I mean, they were still getting paid, I'm sure, heaps of money. But in terms of, you know, them treating their friends like shit, like Sean Waltman, they were pretty much done with WCW by that point, which is pretty well known by this point, I would say. They talk about how, I mean, again, this is pretty well known as well, how there was supposed to be a brand split of sorts between WCW and nWo. Now, nWo was so red fucking hot in like the late 90s, this should come as no surprise, that nWo would have had their one show, and then Nitro would have been the other show. I think Nitro would have become nWo territory, and then Thunder on Thursday nights would have become WCW night. That never ended up happening, of course, before the company went under in 2001. But it is an interesting idea to ponder now, considering that only a few years after that, we would get the actual brand split in the WWE, kind of creating competition within ourselves, was Vince's mindset, as he told Sean Waltman, which Sean Waltman discloses in this episode. But it's interesting to think of how that would have worked out between nWo and WCW. That's what Scott Hall said that he was told at that point in time. And he also said that if they didn't get that done, then nWo would have at least gotten 1 hour of TV on Nitro. One of the 2 hours, one of the 3 hours, whatever. Again, never ended up happening. nWo had a large stranglehold on WCW in like 98 or so when they owned every single WCW pay-per-view. So it really was like an unofficial brand split of sorts that we never really ended up getting full-fledged, a full-throttle brand split in WCW. But again, it's interesting to think about. And they do talk about the brand split, in today's brand split in WWE. And they say that it's working this time around. DDP even points out that it's working this time around because both shows are live. Both Raw and SmackDown are finally live. Which the first time around, I mean, there was a brand split for a few years, and it was well done for the most part. But SmackDown wasn't live. You could just go online. I mean, the internet wasn't as prominent as it is today. But it just didn't have that same anything can happen feel that Raw did. Now, these days, Raw and SmackDown largely feel like equals because they're both live on their respective nights. So anyway, Sean Waltman also says that he feels the brand split is a success, that it's a concept that works because it creates competition. When there is no competition, you create your own competition, whether it be WWE versus NXT or Raw versus SmackDown. There's at least some sort of semblance of competition in WWE finally, at long last, and you know, and right now, than there has been in a long-ass time. So to close out the episode, Scott Hall says that the nWo should be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. On his Hall of Fame induction ring, he had Scott Hall engraved on the inside, and that if the nWo goes in, he would have Razor Ramon inducted, or engraved rather, on that ring. Which wouldn't really make too much sense. I know what you're thinking, like Razor Ramon was never in WCW, but he says that if he only got one, I mean, the nWo is probably going to go in at some point, but it's not a guarantee. So if they never go in, then Scott Hall at least has a ring with his own name on it on the inside, which is pretty cool. And I think they will go in at some point. It's really more a matter of when than if. And I think if they will induct the group, I would just put in Hall, Nash, and Hogan. And I think those, the three founding fathers, really, of the group. So those are the guys that I would induct if nWo was to go in at some point down the road. And I think they were supposed to go in. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they were supposed to go in 2016. Because if you can recall, Scott Hall went in 2014, which was the same year that Hulk Hogan came back to the company. And then Kevin Nash went in 2015. So all guys individually went in various years. And then they probably would have gone in 2016, I think was the rumor, before Hogan, got axed from the company due to the whole racist scandal and blah, 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 in July of 2015. So it never ended up happening, but I'm sure it will happen at some point down the road. It's more a matter of when than if, in my opinion. But anyway, Scott Hall says that DDP saved his life. DDP explains that what he wanted on the inside of his Hall of Fame ring, and it's like perspiration meets inspiration or something along those lines, something pretty positive, something very DDP-esque. And then they're all joking how they're all waiting for Sean Waltman to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, and that it's, he said he's not ready to be inducted yet, but I think DDP and Scott Hall both agree that it's more, like I said earlier, it's more a matter of when and not if we see X-Pac in the WWE Hall of Fame. It's really, he is a worthy inductee. If you put Coco Beware in there, who's really the threshold, I guess, really like the measuring stick for who's worthy of being inducted into the Hall of Fame, I guess you look to Coco Beware. But regardless, I think he will be in at some point down the road. And they say they love each other to close out the episode, and that's it for the WCW versus nWo episode of Table for Three. Again, thoroughly entertaining. Really liked the episode. Didn't learn a lot I didn't already know before, but it is cool to hear these guys talk about the Monday Night Wars and the WCW versus nWo feud, and even the brand split stuff of today, which is always cool. So check it out when you can. All three of these guys have great showings, I guess might be the right word, but they all come across great on this episode. The 22 minutes just flew by. Like, I thought it was going to go by real slow. I watched it after Raw, but they just flew by. It was over before I even batted an eyelash. So check it out when you can. You will not regret it. And that is Table for Three. So again, I think tonight a new episode of Table for Three will be airing. I think with, oh man, I forgot who it was. I think it was the episode that I mentioned last week. I think it's Flair, Steamboat. I forgot who the third person was. I think it's Flair, Steamboat, not Harley Race. It was someone like that, though, from like that time period, from like the NWA days. I don't remember off the top of my head, but that looks good as well. That should be airing tonight after Raw. I'll be talking about that next week right here on WWE Network and Chill. So that being said, guys, thank you for checking out the video. I appreciate it. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, subscribe to the channel for daily content, and share the video as well. I'll be back next Monday, as I said, with another all-new installment of WWE Network and Chill. Till then, guys, I'm Graham G.S. Matthews. Have a great week, and I'll catch your ass down the road.